humanity needs to progress, and we need to push forward and gain more knowledge. And that knowledge is not going to take us where these religious people want us to go.
The beauty of religion is that there's a bunch of stuff I don't understand.
How do you know that your system like actually works? And he's like, aha, I don't know.
The principal disagreement that I think I had with you, Ben, is that there was a subtle, or not so subtle, implication in my view that yes, with no God there's no free will, but somehow having God can solve this problem. I mean, you said a moment ago that you don't think you can establish God's existence through reason alone, but assuming that you do believe in the existence of free will, you think it's a real thing that you have.
Yes.
And simultaneously saying that if there is no God, then free will makes no sense.
Yes.
That does read to me like an argument for God's existence, such that in order to either say that there is free will, in order to say that there is free will, one must believe in God. And that does strike me as an argument for God's existence.
The issue that I have with Alex O'Connor here is a fundamental misunderstanding of what free will is. People feel like free will has to come down from like some greater source, like it has to like literally come down from God, because otherwise then there's just chemicals in your brain. The issue is that free will is more narrowly defined. Free will is basically the ability to act at one's own discretion. What some people would say as well is, if the universe is in fact determinable, then clearly you have no free will. But that's not what that means. All it means is that the outcome of your free will is generally predictable. I like to give this example where if you were to go to the ice cream store and the guy asked you, do you want chocolate or vanilla? And you said vanilla. And then I rewound time 5 seconds. If you switch and you say chocolate, what made you switch to chocolate? It would be the opposite of free will. Like there was some kind of randomness in the universe that forced you to choose chocolate when perhaps the real outcome of your free will would have been to choose vanilla. Yeah, the outcome of your free will might be determinable.
Slightly curve that, or to kind of sand off the rough edges there, I would say that the argument I made is an argument for something extra natural.
Sure.
Now, you can call that God or not God, but the thing that I'm making the argument for is that you cannot get from a materialist Darwinist universe to free will. That is not possible. So I know that the way you solve that is that you say that there is no free will.
That's right.
And what I'm saying to you is you don't act that way.
I hear this all the time. People say, look, you may say there's no free will, but you don't act as though that's the case. I suppose that I'm just confused as to what it would look like for somebody to act as if they believe there was no free will. I mean, the very argument that there is no free will that I subscribe to, at least one of the various forms that it takes, is a sort of Schopenhauerian view that you can do as you will, you just can't will what you will. And that you are essentially just a biological machine reacting to its to its internal and...
Right, you can do what you will, but you can't will what you will, right? Because to will what you will does imply that like there is some you out there that exists beyond this natural world, right? That can actually have I don't even know how you would describe it, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like I don't know what absolute free will would look like. I don't know what this free will, even if it came down from God, would look like. They both were in agreement that if God does exist, then you must therefore. I don't feel like that logically follows, right? Because you don't will what you will, even if God exists. God gave you the temptation to eat from the tree, apparently. You will what you do, but you don't will what you will. I mean, it's still true, even if they're... So I don't even know what they're arguing right now.
And evolutionary drives. That's what's happening. Now,
again, I'm drawing from a realm that is not evolutionarily, biologically connected. The word purpose is really... Teleology, obviously, has been taken out of the realm of science pretty thoroughly by atheists and by many people in the sciences, although I would argue that, again, most scientists speak in the realm of teleology literally all the time, and they're borrowing language from the language of teleology, even when they're describing functions of particular body parts, right? The heart pumps blood in order to keep you alive, right? They're constantly using language that's teleological in nature. The real question that I have, and this is what goes to the question that you were asking at the beginning, before, there's a pre-question question, which was...
I don't know if he was making the argument disingenuously when the scientist says, like, hey, your heart's purpose is to pump blood. No one was there with a purpose of saying, okay, I'm going to make this heart so it can pump blood. That just, it was evolutionary beneficial, and then it evolved, right? And we can look back and we can say, because the heart is able to do this thing, it was able to evolve. That's kind of not a very, we'll say, intuitive way to look at it. We'd like to look at things as having a purpose versus not having a purpose. And in this case, we can say the purpose of the heart is to do this and that. semantics. I don't know if he was trying to be disingenuous there by saying like, oh, scientists actually know that, God actually made these things, because they always give purpose even though there would be no purpose in a purely naturalistic universe.
The good of religion to society, one of those goods is people believing that their free will matters, and this actually is a useful thing. So I believe that it is deeply important for people in society to believe that they have the capacity to change themselves and to make different decisions than what biology would drive them to. So you say, well, it's biology that drives you to get out of bed in the morning, which is almost Calvinist in sort of the way that it's described, right? It's like you're predestined to get out of bed in the morning, so thus you get out of bed in the morning. But the reality is that we are constantly making decisions as though those decisions make a difference in the universe. And what social science actually does tend to show is that when people believe that they have control over their own actions, then when they believe that they're capable of changing the way that they live, they do make those changes with more alacrity and in better directions than if they don't believe that. If people tend to believe in a deterministic universe, they do act worse. So it may work. This is going to be sort of Straussian in its implications, but that may work for you. You're a very high IQ individual who can somehow reconcile the idea of living a very purposeful life with the...
Ben Shapiro is a master of conflating like two things into the same thing, where I feel like he's trying to put atheism in the same boat as like, you don't think you have free will and you think your life is worthless and nothing you do matters at all, right? And then once you conflate these two things, you can take the negatives of somebody who has that mindset and apply it to atheists. And that's clearly what he's trying to do here.
The idea that actually there's no purpose to anything. But for the vast majority of people, that is not actually how they live. And I would suggest that even in your daily life, you don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, man, my biology is driving me this morning to get on the bike, have a great day, the sun is shining. That's my biology doing this. And I don't think that most people who live purposeful lives, even if they believe that everything they're doing is predetermined by the world around them, by their own biology, I don't believe they actually feel that. They have to engage in what they themselves would term an illusion in order to feel a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives.
Of course, but that's what the evolutionary process, in my view, in my worldview, I should say, has done so well, is provide precisely that illusion. I mean, it's not as, you say, look, you don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, gosh, look at my biological...
My neurons are firing, yeah.
Of course not, because if I did, then the whole evolutionary purpose that this illusion serves would fall away. I mean, you say that this is a fairly purposeless life, and perhaps the implications that it's a bit of a depressing one. I didn't come here to inspire optimism in people. I just think it is in fact...
I mean, even with Alex O'Connor here, his narrative, why do we need this illusion? Why wouldn't we want to be more like robots, right? Why wouldn't we want to be more like, this doesn't matter and we shouldn't care, right? Like, it feels counterintuitive that we would be in this position, not have free will, and then evolution would make us want to have free will. I don't know.
You're succeeding, by the way.
It is in fact the case that free will doesn't exist. And we may feel very nihilistic towards that, but as a wise man once said, facts don't care about your feelings. And I will say that the argument against free will, in my view, is based upon something broader than just scientific analysis or empirical research. Rather, we can build an argument, I think, from a law of logic, the proposition that P must either be true or false, and it can't be both, it can't be neither. It has to be one or the other. Now, this law of the excluded middle, one of the foundational precepts of philosophy, we can simply ask a question of any kind of mental activity, and this will be regardless of whether it's material or immaterial. That's what makes this a crucial argument, and an important one, a pertinent one, is that you can ask of that mental activity, is it determined or is it not? That is it determined by anything else, or is it completely undetermined by anything? If it's undetermined by anything, then it's random, and you're by definition not in control of that which is random. If it's determined by something, then it's either determined by something further inside your mind, or inside your brain, or indeed inside your soul, or it's determined by something external to your brain. If it's determined by something external to yourself, I should say yourself rather than your brain here to rid this conversation of any implicit materialism, exterior to yourself, if that's what's determining the action, then clearly you're not in ultimate control of that action. If it's something inside of yourself somewhere, then all you do is push the problem back, and you ask the question again, is that thing determined or is it indeterminate? It's indeterminate, it's random, determined. You keep going back until you either terminate in something outside of the self, something...
This is the argument that will ultimately lead to there is no such thing as free will by Alex O'Connor's reasoning here. But again, I feel like free will is it's an emergent property. More you dissect and tear away the things that, if I take this away, do you still have free will? Well, let's keep tearing away. And now you have a problem of when does a grain of sand turn into a heap of sand kind of thing.
Or I suppose something undetermined and therefore random, either of which you are completely out of control in. If you say that it terminates in something like a soul, people like to do this. They say, well, look, with a religious philosophy, we have the benefit of introducing a soul. That doesn't solve anything.
That argument does rely on the complete deconstruction of the self. I mean, you're using the term self in this argument in, I think, a couple of different ways. You're saying something outside yourself, but then you're breaking down the self into a bunch of separate components as though the self is a computer. Right? As though if you took the self and you broke it down into a machine, and there's like the microchip, and you've got the processor, you've got all these different parts of it. So it has to be coming from here, or it has to be coming from here. But I think the very idea that we have of ourselves as selves is as a deciding being. And so the attempt to carve that down into, so which parts of the deciding being, that is an avoidance strategy. So I don't think that the argument quite holds.
Well, if we can call the self...
Yeah, I sadly would agree with Ben Shapiro there.
Just a deciding being.
Call it a deciding being.
Then that sort of fundamental assumption that we make about the nature of the self, I don't think is going to be incompatible with atheism.
How so?
Because we're talking about what the self is here. I mean, atheists believe in the self. Everybody believes in the self.
Well, no, that's not. I mean, that I find difficult to believe. Why would an atheist believe in the self? The self is a series of non-deciding mechanisms, as you've described. I see that your view of the self is an atheist view of the self, a meatball wandering through space, as I've put it somewhat colorfully. The sort of Spinoza idea that you're a stone that's been thrown, and you can comprehend that you've been thrown, but you're a stone that's been thrown, and that's just the way that it is. Why would there be in atheist philosophy such a thing as a deciding self? The deciding being, is external to the idea of an evolutionary cause, because the very word deciding suggests uncaused decision making. And you've just excluded it through your own philosophy.
Uncaused decision making, I suppose, is a concept that I think is unintelligible, and therefore, if there is an unintelligibility of the self on atheism, I suppose the thrust of the criticism that I made to essentially every point you made in that video, except for the argument from motion, is that what you're saying to me, if it applies to atheism, I think simultaneously applies to theism as well.
How so?
An uncaused decision. I mean, what is the process by which a decision is made?
But now you're falling into the same sort of argument that I excluded at the beginning, which was, I said that the beauty of religion is that there's a bunch of stuff I don't understand. So I can't.
He's like, okay, but how do you know that your system like actually works and actually can provide free will? And he's like, aha, I don't know.
Explain to you.
Aha, I got you. I don't know.
How the uncaused self makes
atheism defeated
decisions.
Well, then I can't explain to you how the uncaused self exists on an atheist
But you have a
framework.
burden, and I don't.
I don't think that's the case.
You do, though. I mean, the simple fact is that you are the one who's claiming that a reasonable materialist universe is the cause of all. And so, if that's the case, you do have to explain the mechanism in a way that I certainly do not. My entire philosophy rests on the positing of an entire realm of things I don't understand in terms of their interaction with the world. Now, as I said at the very beginning, that leaves me a giant escape hatch. I'm not going to pretend that that's not a giant escape hatch. It acts in practice as a giant escape hatch. It also tends to act as a fundamental principle of faith, right? Again, in every moral realm, right? When we get to the problem of good and evil, right? One of the big questions is, well, how can God allow evil to take place in the world? And the fundamental religious answer, as it has been for thousands of years, is my mind is not God's, which is a giant escape hatch. It also happens to be true from a religious point of view.
So if I may, there are two sort of escape hatches here. There are two appeals to mystery going on here. And it seems to me that what you're saying is something along the lines of, my simple appeal to mystery here is disallowed in the way that you're allowed to appeal to this mystery because I'm the one making the claim. I think that
not because I'm the one making the claim, but because
I'm the one with the burden. In the context of this discussion,
I'm missing the who's the you and the who's the I.
Yes,
but yes,
I see what you mean. I'm speaking for myself there.
Sorry.
If in the context of this discussion, this began the subject which I think is the first one you bring up in this video, free will. Here's this thing that I think exists, and on the basis of its existence, think entails the existence of a God, or at least points to the existence of a God. I shouldn't say entail. And then when I say that I don't think that the concept of free will is intelligible, and you say, well, how is it intelligible on atheism? And I say, I'm not sure it is, but it's not on theism either. And you say, well, there's my escape hatch. I can appeal to mystery. I don't think the burden is on me there. I think you are the one who's making the claim that free will does exist, that there is this mysterious property of the universe that escapes this determined or indetermined dichotomy. And then when I say that this is...
It's 100% true. Ben Shapiro is the one who's saying free will exists, right? Because of God.
This is unintelligible to me, and based on what I see to be fundamentally appeal to a law of logic, suddenly I'm the one making the claim. I'm the one with the burden who has to do the proving.
No, the actual claim that I originally made, if you recall, was a conditional claim. Mm-hmm. I did not claim free will exists, therefore God. I claimed if you believe free will exists, it cannot exist in a materialist universe. Now, you say, okay, fine, it doesn't exist in a materialist.
There was this thing that happened with Destiny where he was debating on X with all of these like conservative people, and Nick Fuentes was there, and Nick Fuentes was making these, we all know he makes like these crazy claims but when he's debating, he makes like the most vanilla softcore claims possible, right? So he debates a very vanilla version of everything that he preaches to his own audience, right? And this is exactly what Ben Shapiro is doing here, right? Like I know on his channel he'll say these crazy, unbelievable things that like I would love to debate him on because he will be absolutely destroyed. But when he's in an actual debate and he knows he'll be held up to some sort of standard, he takes the most vanilla. He's like, look, I'm not saying free will actually exists. I'm just saying that if it were to exist, it could only exist by God. That's all I'm saying.
Materialist universe. I don't believe in free will.
Yes.
That's fine. It's totally plausible. As I said right at the top here, I'm not going to prove to you that God exists today. What I am going to say is that the vast majority of people throughout nearly all of human history have believed there's a thing called a self. It is a deciding self that makes these decisions. If you are a person who believes that, you're right. It can't exist in your world. So I'm not saying that it does exist. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're totally right. And all of this is just a series of chemical firings. That's quite plausible. That's fine. What I have said, and this is the argument that hasn't yet been rebutted, is that society does require an extraordinary number of people to believe that they are capable of making decisions for the good or for the bad. Because again, not everybody is you. Not everybody is capable of waking up in the morning, putting one half of their brain on hold, the side that says what I'm doing today doesn't matter, and we are all going to wind up in the cosmic nothingness of space anyway, and the sun's going to explode and eat the Earth. Most people don't function that way. And so a functional society, a society that actually works, relies on people actually believing that their fate is in their hands. And the way that people tend to understand that.
I don't accept this. This is like a very common religious argument that says like, oh, but like think about the world without religion. Everyone will just know the truth, right? That they're gonna like die and that nothing's gonna matter to them once they're dead. I just don't believe this argument. I don't see any evidence where like a more atheistic or more deterministic type of society, like maybe we could even look towards Japan for that. I don't see the evidence that such a society would be less motivated or less I don't know, less humane, less empathetic, less happy, I guess we'll say. I just don't see that. It feels like a big cope. It feels like they're coping with the religion by saying that it helps other people cope, and I don't believe that.
On a day-to-day level I get up in the morning.
At the very least, I don't think it's even a good coping mechanism. I think there's better copes.
And I make a decision whether I'm taking my kids to school today. I get up in the morning and I decide whether I'm giving charity today. I get up in the morning and I decide whether to go to a job today. Because the truth is that for a huge number of people, and I would say this is true for virtually
especially I'm sorry, but especially when they say like, oh, like, look, you're so smart, you can handle the truth, but everyone else, they can't handle the truth. They can't handle it. They can't handle it. We need to lie to them. It's just such a massive like, I don't know. It's such a stupid way to see things.
Not virtually all. Many. I'd say the majority of people, if they were informed since the time they were small that their decision-making process does not exist. There is no decision to be made. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Those decisions have no moral weight in the universe because the universe has no moral weight. There is no way to create a functional society on the basis of these premises. There may be a Platonic world where philosophers can think about this in the gardens of their imagination and feel great about it. But that's not actually how society functions, not for children, not for teenagers, not for adults.
Yes. We're going to go on and talk about that in the second.
Especially when you take a look at like how science is always being pushed back on by like the religious groups. It's so obvious, right? Like this type of argument serves that narrative that's always against science, right? Because at some point, humanity needs to progress and we need to push forward and gain more knowledge. And that knowledge is not going to take us where these religious people want us to go. It's not going to take us there. It's not going to take us to this purposeful, godful worldview that they have, right? And so what they want to do is they want to constantly kick the bucket down the road, kick the bucket down the road. People aren't ready. We need religion. And then it keeps going down, generation after generation. And then it actually starts to hurt us, right? Because as a society, we're grasping onto a cope. And the more we grab onto this cope, the less we can actually move forward and do something useful.
I had free will to ask any of the questions I've had written down here, but I just didn't want to. I didn't want to stop either of you. It's been breathless and captivating. I'm sure you'll agree. Before we go to our first break, we are going to go on and talk about society and how morality undergirds society and civilization.
May I just say, I know we're coming to the end of the section, just to close off this moment, that if people listening agree with me that free will in fact doesn't exist, and simultaneously agree with you that free will is somehow necessary for the upkeep of civilization, then I would simply ask them to consider who's relying on the delusion here, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as an insult, but you see what I'm saying?
That is an insult. Right? Who is relying on the delusion? It's perfect. And is Ben Shapiro going to agree with him?
I totally agree. And so from my argument,
yeah, he agrees.
You would be, and from your argument, I would be. Yeah. Meaning, I think that you are delusional. There's no free will, and you think I'm delusional in the sense that.
This is what I mean, right? They take the most vanilla position, right? He's clearly saying, look, I believe all of this other crazy stuff back here, but don't touch any of that stuff. Don't touch any of that stuff that I believe over here, because I'm making this really vanilla claim that you now have to deal with without touching any of the other crazy stuff that I actually believe that actually led me to the belief of this vanilla claim, right? But I can defend this vanilla claim using your logic as well, right? And,
there is no free will, and yet I believe it.
Something like that. Yeah.
So for you, Alex, just before we go to the break then, because we're trying to break it down, we've got two insane minds here, really kind of grappling. And
yeah, well, one of them is definitely an insane mind.
I feel as I've won a prize in a competition just to be here sitting with you both.
Now, there is a deep problem with this, and that is, if I meet a man who wants to kill me, or a friend, and he says that he doesn't believe in God, there's very little I can do to talk him out of that, except I can threaten him with legal sanction, I can threaten him with moral reproach, exclusion from the moral community, but there's not much more I can do. However, if a person says that he wants to kill me, and he believes that he wants to kill me because God has told him to do so, then I don't even have that minimal reproach available to me, because there is no law written by any man of any time that could ever count one iota against the dictates of the creator of the universe. Therefore, if that God in fact does not exist, and if these moralities are in fact human inventions, then what you have in the grounding of an ethical system in the dictates, allegedly, of the creator of the universe is all of the arbitrariness and subjectivity and failure and faults of nihilism and human invented morality, with all of the certainty and all of the faith and all of the unanswerability.
I really do like Alex O'Connor, the way he phrases his argument from beginning to end. It really builds that narrative, which I feel like that's something I lack completely. I would have just been like, but if God isn't real, then people are just tricking you. Maybe that's how I would have phrased that, but he phrased it so eloquently right there.
Of the creator of the universe. That to me seems a dangerous cocktail that we drink at our peril.
So many things there, and so much that you're saying is quite brilliant. I actually thought you were going in a different direction with that last example, which I'll explain in a second. So, to start with the very beginning, obviously, the idea of right and wrong. So there are many problems with emotivism. Alistair McIntyre does a good job sort of breaking down the problems with emotivism. But the sort of idea that there have to be certain moral absolutes that are beyond contention, and those moral absolutes have to be universally accepted. You can ground that, I suppose, in a sort of descriptive universe. The problem is that, to go back to your example, which again I think is a really interesting one, if a man comes to kill me, I think that the real question of religion versus non-religion in the utility sphere here is it more likely that a man is going to come to kill you being a devotee of a religion that says that he must kill you, or is it more likely that a man is going to kill you out of self-interest because he is not a devotee of a God who says that killing is wrong? So if you are faced with these two alternatives, to kind of remove your example one step, the question is why the man has come to kill you. I mean, that's your premise is the man has come to kill you because God told him to, and so he can't be dissuaded by force. Agreed. We see that full scale in the real world on a fairly regular basis. It is also true that over the course of human history, men have come to kill one another on the basis of self-interest in extraordinary amounts of the time. Tribal self-interest particularly, having no particular relationship with...
Yeah, but the argument kind of falls apart when one of the main reasons people kill each other is God, glory, and gold, right? Those are the three. If God is in your top three reasons for murder, I don't think that's a strong argument you can make there.
With God, just the idea that I want to kill you over territory, I want to kill you over resources, I want to kill you because you're not a member of my immediate kin family, or because you killed a member of my kin family, and so in revenge I need to kill a member of your kin family. The entire, to borrow from your language, the entire sort of evolution of religion on a utility basis would have been to create moral absolutes that are applicable more broadly than to you and your friends. Any morality that can be created on an individual level is inherently dangerous because you can immediately graft that morality onto your personal self-interest. The entire purpose of religion, whether you want to ground that in evolutionary brain functionings, or whether you want to ground that in revelation, the entire purpose of religion on a utility level is to remove morality from the purview of my special interest and to say, here are things that I cannot do, even if they are in my interest, because there is a higher power that says I cannot do these things. I think that a society that does not have these moral absolutes is in deep trouble. A society that refuses to say that there are certain absolutes that cannot be crossed under any circumstances that are universally applicable, it reduces things that we all take for granted, like equal justice before the law, like the idea that the law is supposed to equally apply to everybody, whether they're a member of your family or whether they're not. And there are broad cultural differences in these questions. I mean, to pretend that all human societies have equality under law is obviously not true. It's not even remotely true, actually. There's a very good book called The Weirdest People in the World, all about the idea that we in the West have this sort of ethnocentric view of ourselves where we think everybody thinks like people in the West. But the truth is that because we are Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, we have particular views of the world. Those views are drawn from a particularistic tradition. That particularistic tradition is biblical in nature. I mean, it is Judeo-Christian in nature, even if you're just describing European society or American society historically speaking. So the kind of removal of God from the equation, your suggestion is that God makes a person impervious to countervailing responses. And my answer is yes, God does make a person impervious to countervailing responses, including the evils of one's own heart, if you truly believe that God is standing above you telling you not to do that thing. And again, social science tends to bear this out. People who believe that God is above them tend to get more charity, for example. People who tend to live inside religious communities, within the religious community. And again, I'm not going to pretend that I think all religions are equivalent in their truth propositions, because I don't. I mean, if I did, I wouldn't be wearing a yarmulke, right? So that's just what it is. Inside religious communities, a lot of social bonds and a lot of social frameworks are built on the basis of this shared belief system. In other words, diversity itself, self-interest, cannot always check self-interest, and it tends to tear apart societies and communities unless there's an orienting goal. That orienting goal traditionally has been performed by church. It's been traditionally performed by the idea that you are serving God together. And because of that, people build these social bonds, including the institutions of police, for example, to
I feel like that was just one really long cope session by Ben Shapiro.
Prevent people from killing each other, because we now all agree that killing is wrong. So we also have a third party that we can actually give the power to stop that killing. So again, I think that the question of utility here is one of whether you think that the chief danger is that people are going to believe in a God who tells them to kill in God's name, or whether you think that the chief danger is in man's own heart, and that man.
Yeah. So the argument that Alex O'Connor made still stands. I don't think he's destroyed that argument, where if it's within your own heart and you cannot be persuaded, at least I can still say, but look at these consequences that are going to happen, right? You might go to prison. This might happen, that might happen. But if you say, oh, but like, I'm actually being instructed by God, well, then even those consequences seem ephemeral compared to what would happen if you don't obey God, right? Because, and it's just, I don't feel like this is a good argument to make, because it's making two things equal that are not equal, right?
Sort of culture of Europe and its success and America is indebted to Christianity. I mean, this is of course true in a sense, but there's been a recent revival, it seems. I don't really know quite how it's happened. I think it's got a lot to do with Tom Holland, maybe. That's the historian, not the superhero.
Not Spider-Man.
This idea that actually,
I thought he was saying
the great. I wonder what he would have to say on all of this. The Western civilization sort of depends and should be in gratitude to a religious tradition, because it provided this kind of ethical framework in which this could have arisen. We hear about the scientific enlightenment. We hear about the grounding of ethics in God, the creation of natural rights, as if these things weren't established in resistance all the way along to the religious tradition. A society that today, I'll expand on this if you like. A society today that decides that religion throughout its history has been wrong about the position of women in society, wrong about the mortal fate of practicing homosexuals, wrong about the position of the earth in relation to the sun, wrong about the age of both of those celestial bodies, wrong about the common evolutionary ancestry of every animal, including the human animal on planet Earth, wrong about the ownership of other human beings as private property. Now has to contend with a religious tradition that doesn't come to us with contrition and apology and say, well, maybe we were wrong about these things. But no, these are all our things after all. We're going to claim these things.
I do have to say that if you give like a list of things like that, what's going to happen is your opponent is going to pick the one thing on that list that they feel like they can argue against, and they're going to cherry pick it, and then they're going to debate that, right?
I know that St. Paul says, I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over a man. Rather, she should remain silent. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And that man is the glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. But don't you know that the social justice movement is essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? I know that the Old Testament not only explicitly condones the ownership of other human beings as private property, but gives detailed instructions about exactly how to buy and indeed take them, sometimes including as sexual property. But don't you know that the abolitionist movement was essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? Yes, I know that Galileo was shown the instruments of torture by the Inquisition for having the temerity to suggest that the Earth might orbit the sun rather than the other way around. But don't you know that the scientific revolution, which he authored, was essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? I'd find it funny if it wasn't so offensive to the people who established these very developments against the very religious traditions that now want to claim them as their own.
Okay, so
100%.
I would buy that, except for the fact that many of the people that you mentioned in these contexts explicitly counted themselves as religious believers, and we're speaking.
This is such an insane cope. This is an insane level of cope. I mean, it's really easy to say, oh, well, all of these people that you're talking about, they were Christian, right? But sure, but like, did Christians as a whole have this view, or have just stumbled upon the evidence and are dictated by the evidence, even if it goes against their religious views, right? Like Galileo.
In the name of the religion while they're doing it. So to take the abolitionist movement as an example, I mean, William Wilberforce, obviously a tremendously religious person and a big believer in the New Testament. Isaac Newton, obviously deeply ensconced in the New Testament, right? Yeah, certainly important to the scientific revolution. The point about...
You can't say because Isaac Newton was a Christian, that means that his science was a byproduct of Christianity. Like it just doesn't. It's like saying that someone was wearing Nike shoes while they cured cancer, and so Nike played a part in curing cancer.
Religion. And this is why when I wrote my book, I have to name the title now and plug myself because that's the way it works.
The right
side of history. The reason that I talked about how reason and moral purpose made the West is because I think that one of the fundamental precepts of at least Judeo-Christian religion is that when God gives a text or a set of ideas to human beings, he expects us to use our reason to apply to those texts. And so the sort of evolution of interpretation is part of the religious tradition. I mean, that's always been the case in my religion anyway. So I always hesitate to speak on behalf of other people's religions because I don't know them nearly as well as I know my own. So when I talk about sort of the application of reason to tradition in the religious...
Hold on. He doesn't know other people's religions nearly as well as he knows his own? Is Ben Shapiro admitting that he's Jewish because he was born Jewish?
Religious tradition, obviously we have books and books and books of text.
I'm shocked.
Discussing and debating these very ideas, and the idea of religious debate has always been central to the idea of Judeo-Christian religion, and when it hasn't been, it's been seen as repressive and has spawned then other Christian movements that then argue with the original movement and end up generating in almost Hegelian fashion some new form of interpretation. The point that I'm making is that outside that framework it doesn't exist, meaning that once if the argument is over interpretation of particular biblical verses in a context in which there is a God who puts certain moral precepts beyond human judgment, those arguments you can have without threatening the entire social structure. What is very difficult is to have a social structure at all in the absence of fundamental moral precepts that are presupposed by everyone. And I think one of the reasons that you're seeing a sort of revival of this idea that religion is very important to the West is because one of the things that we have seen is that as religion has become less important to the West, we've seen declining birth rates en masse. We've seen rises in suicidal ideation. We've seen, especially over the last 10 years, tremendous individual atomization.
This is true of the entire world, the declining birth rate. And this is what I said, right? If you give me a list, I'm going to pick the weakest one and I'm going to fight you on that. Ben Shapiro gave a list. I don't even remember everything on that list. All I know is I heard declining birth rates. I know that's true among the entire world. Doesn't matter if you're Christian or not, right? It has more to do with social economic stance of your country, right, than anything else.
Certainly an extraordinary amount of less social connection. Right? All of these things are things that frankly used to be provided by church and these social institutions that again were oriented toward a single purpose. So when you talk about the idea that, I'm going to put aside the free will discussion because I think again it's easy to get caught up in the reversion to the argument that I was making before when you were saying that, can you argue the man out of stabbing you? To use your framework, I mean, you can't argue him out of doing anything. I mean, you're going to say words are going to have an impact. You can't argue him out of doing anything. But not to get back into a topic we've handled free will is done.
I'm not going to answer that, although hopefully people will know from what I said before that I think it's still sensible to say you can argue somebody out or something. The first half of what you say there is in so many words, I think, what I was saying before, which is that yes, this goes both ways. That is, thanks be to God when he is able to provide us with the grounding for resisting oppression and throwing off tyranny. Yeah. But what about when the same God is used to justify the exact opposite? What I'm saying is that this goes both ways.
You're going to have to weigh in one side or the other, in terms of utility. Right? You're building a society. Let's say that, I won't say you're God. Let's say that you're a master of a society and you get to build that society. One of the things that presumably you're going to do is you're going to build in certain things that are untouchable. Right? There's certain moral precepts that you're going to build in that are untouchable. And how are you going to justify those things to people such that they're going to believe you? You're going to either have to use compulsion or you're going to have to use some sort of other argument that...
I really hate it when, theists come into the debate not even claiming that the religion is true, not claiming that God is real, not claiming anything other than utility, as if humanity is so stupid that unless we had God, there would be no other utility to replace that. We need something that it tells us you will literally go to the worst place imaginable forever if you don't believe this thing, right? Whereas, it's so against the First Amendment as well, where we want freedom of speech, right? In order to actually look at literally everything, even these basic assumptions, right? That Ben Shapiro says, when you build a society, you want these basic assumptions that are untouchable. Sometimes you want to touch them, right? Especially because, later on, 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years down the line, you think these basic assumptions are going to be perfect for forever. It's not realistic. You'll want to be able to go into these basic assumptions, debate them, tweak them, change them as needed.
That is that is so strong that they're going to overweigh their self. I mean, there's a reason why Voltaire suggested he didn't believe in God, but he hoped that his mates didn't steal silverware.
Yeah, that's an interesting indictment on the position that theists don't say that atheists can't be moral, right? When people have this argument about morality,
atheists can certainly be moral.
Oftentimes people have this misunderstanding. The argument Christopher Hitchens did it best in saying, we don't need divine permission to be good and all of this. Fine, but as you say, you don't need to believe in God to be good, but you need to believe in God to ground that goodness. But then when you sort of casually throw in this statement by Voltaire, I don't believe in God, but I hope that my mate does. That implies that actually maybe you do think that without the belief in God, somebody isn't.
No, I think that Voltaire thought that he was good, meaning that Voltaire was an atheist and thought that he was good. But his point was sort of back to the Straussian Platonic point.
His point was that he hoped his mate believed in God because without that belief she wouldn't be able to.
Right. So in other words, because again, when we're arguing on the basis of broad societal utility, one of the things. So I happen to be in the happy position of being able to argue that what I think is socially useful also happens to be true. The question I'm asking you, and I think that's what a lot of this conversation is whether you think that what is socially useful is actually false or an evolutionary illusion. And I think that's kind of the position you're taking. Unless you want to argue that generally speaking, religion is either not evolutionarily adaptive, which would be a hard position to actually take.
I think it must be, otherwise it wouldn't exist.
Or you'd have to argue that it's even if it's adaptive, it's of no general benefit to humankind or is an illusion. Right? Yes. I mean, that's the position you're taking. So one of the things I'm enjoying about the conversation is
there's this misconception that if it crosses the boundary of evolution, right, and it sticks and it remains, that it must therefore 100% be beneficial forever, for all reasons. It's just not true. Like, believing in God might be beneficial short term, right? I mean, clearly the belief in God, right, would not like destroy you or kill you, right, if you're trying to survive out in the wild, out in the savannah or whatever, right? It's something that really just creeps in once you have a society and you've built all this stuff, and evolution wasn't meant to make humans good at building societies that last forever and have technological advancements. Like, that's just not what evolution was built for.
Is that I don't think either of us can argue each other or anything, but it is clarifying what exactly the lines of the division are.
Yes, to backtrack a moment, because you said more than one thing in what I just responded to. You also mentioned, while you talk about Isaac Newton being a Christian, so I mean, people were astonished discovering his private notes to find that he spent more time talking about theology than he did science. This is certainly the case, but I do think it's worth pointing out when people like to notice that the originators of the scientific revolution in particular were believers in God.
The peculiar idea that religion itself must fundamentally be undermined by scientific discovery, I don't see quite why.
Well, I would agree with that. I'm just saying that the rebuttal that's presented to that opinion fairly commonly, I don't think works for the reasons that I've said.
Okay, well, let's give you both a little breather, because we're going to go to another break very shortly. We fitted in so much, and I had all these questions, and I haven't asked any of them, and I'm worried now that I'm going to be left unemployed.
Feels like a boring debate from Ben Shapiro's side. I mean, I can't remember Ben Shapiro being interesting necessarily, but I don't know, just kind of boring.